Assalamualaikum and a very good day I bid to the both of you, the respectable Sir Azhari and the reputable Madam Nur Azhar Muhammad Rati. To start off, my name is Muhammad Ashraf bin Azrul and the title of my final year project is Pragmatic Failures in Intercultural Communication in the movie Bad It Like Beckham. Moving forward, the explanation on the arrangement of my presentation. Throughout my presentation, I will thoroughly explain and meticulously justify the introduction to my final year project, the research objective and the research question of my final year project, the literature review of my final year project, the complete methodology of my final year project, the final results of my final year project, and before ending the presentation, I will explain the discussion and conclusion of my final year project. Following that, the introduction. First and foremost, the background of study to my final year project. According to Jablonski in 2021, pragmatics is a branch of linguistics, which is the study of language. Pragmatics focuses on conversational implication, a process in which the speaker implies and the listener infers. Following that, Shen in 2017 stated that pragmatic failures is the inability to understand the meaning behind what is said, which frequently leads to misunderstanding or confusion in cross-cultural communication. When the pragmatic force of a language is misunderstood, such as when an apology is mistakenly taken for an explanation, communication fails, which is also known as pragmatic failure as quoted by Luo in 2018. In addition, according to Thomas in 1983, pragmatic failures can be divided into two categories, which are language pragmatic failure and social pragmatic failure. Language pragmatic failure is called pragma-linguistic failure and it refers to pragmatic failures caused by misunderstanding the linguistic context. Social pragmatic failure, on the other hand, is called socio-pragmatic failure and it refers to pragmatic failure because of misunderstanding or ignoring both sides of the social background and cultural differences and language expression errors. Moreover, pragmatic failures are one of the elements that many researchers have studied because of the impact that they have on intercultural communication. Because intercultural communication is very delicate, it requires diplomacy and a lot of politeness. If these two things are not observed, it can result in pragmatic failures. As a result, people must understand the social and cultural context of both speakers and receivers. It is not just about understanding the literal meaning of what has been communicated. One has to be communicatively competent as it is imperative to comprehend the explicit meaning of sentences. Thus, in order for people to communicate successfully, they also need to have pragmatic competence. Second of all, problem statement. When individuals from various cultural backgrounds come together and communicate, the phenomena such as misinterpretation, miscommunication, misconception, and misbelief commonly occurs. Looking at the modern world, pragmatic failures can result in three problematic issues, which are frictions in the community, tarnished company image and reputation, as well as business disruption. Firstly, friction in the community. This is frequently observed when certain individuals share or post something on social media. When individuals are not aware of the messages that they are sharing, it can result in other people becoming uncomfortable due to the misinterpretation of the messages behind the sharing. In other words, if someone is not careful, sometimes their communication can result in certain implications where certain groups of people will be offended. Secondly, pragmatic failures can lead to a company's image and reputation being tarnished. When it comes to this context, it frequently comes from the act of marketing. When marketing is done, promotional activities most often reach audiences with diverse cultural backgrounds and languages spoken. For instance, when a company posts a poster or a video advertisement of promotion that only considers certain specific cultures and completely ignores the taboos and sensitivity of other cultures, this will lead to the occurrence of pragmatic failure. Thus, without awareness of one's cultural manners of politeness and social sensitivity, it will lead to pragmatic failures to the point that it punishes the business's public image and brings disruption to their companies despite not being intended to do so. Thirdly, pragmatic failures can result in business disruption. This context of pragmatic failures can be heavily observed in the action of discussions between the company's representatives who come from two distinct cultural backgrounds. For example, if one company's representative are from Indonesian culture and the other company's representative are from American culture, For the Indonesians, they tend to be a bit indirect as a form of showing manners as opposed to Americans who prefer things to be directly stated as a form of showing manners. When situations like this occur in business discussion, it can cause the other representatives to be a bit confused and not understand the other's main goals and objective of the discussion, which will eventually lead to pragmatic failures. Because of all this, it is the aim of the researcher to conduct the study about pragmatic failures in the entertainment industry, especially how pragmatic failures are portrayed in a movie, such as the movie selected, which is Band Aid Like Backup. Moving on to the research objective and research question to the study. For the research objective, firstly, this research aims to identify the pragmatic failure instances in intercultural communication in the movie Band Aid Like Backup. And secondly, this research aims to analyze how pragmatic failures affect the intercultural communication between the characters in the movie Band Aid Like Backup. As for the research question of the study, firstly, what are the type of pragmatic failure instances in intercultural communication in the movie Band Aid Like Backup? And secondly, how do the identified pragmatic failures affect intercultural communication between the characters in the movie Band Aid Like Backup? Alright, moving on the literature review. Before I decided on the framework that best suited this particular study, I have firstly thoroughly examined and justified three different frameworks that are oftentimes employed by scholars investigating case of pragmatic failures. These frameworks include George Gould's 1996 Key Concepts on Pragmatic Failures, Brown and Levinson's 1987 Politeness, Strategies, and Thomas' 1983 Model of Cross-Cultural Pragmatic Failure. After in-depth analysis and examination, I finally decided to choose the framework Thomas' 1983 Model of Cross-Cultural Pragmatic Failure as the framework that best suited for this study. The reason why the other two mentioned frameworks are less suited are because, firstly, both of them divided pragmatic failures into too many different categories, which makes it too complicated in identifying and categorizing the pragmatic failure instances examined in the movie. Secondly, the two other frameworks do not give an in-depth focus on the researcher's objective of analyzing how pragmatic failures affect the intercultural communication between the characters in the movie, but instead are more appropriate for mainly analyzing the cause behind the occurrence of pragmatic failures. To give further justification on the framework chosen, Thomas divided pragmatic failure into two categories, which are pragma-linguistic failure and socio-pragmatic failure, which the researcher believed the framework can help in achieving all of the goals of this particular study. The rationale behind this is that while socio-pragmatic failure covers the outcomes of applying one culture's social rules in a communicative situation where a different culture's social rules should be used, pragma-linguistic failure covers the failures of occurrence when speech act strategies are transferred from the first language and applied in the second language, resulting in inappropriate effects in the target language. Moving on, the related past studies that employ Thomas' 1983 framework on cross-cultural pragmatic failure. The first related past study is entitled Communication Failures in Netflix Drama Series 13 Reasons Why, a pragmatic analysis. Pragmatic failure in the subtitle of the Moonlight movie is the subject of the second study, and cross-cultural pragmatic failure is the subject of the third and final past study under examination. From extensive analysis, the three past studies are quite similar to the current study to a certain extent. In terms of the framework used by the past studies, the researchers Wulandari, Hapsari and Brown 2018, Mahniza, Lubis and Monzo 2020, as well as Nuichi 2015 were exercising Thomas' 1983 model of cross-cultural pragmatic failure to analyze their respective literature works, which the first study analyzed characters' interaction in a drama series, the second past study examined subtitle of a movie, and the third past study explaining ways to enhance second language learners' pragmatics and communicative competence. Nevertheless, a gap was identified in the three past studies as none of the aforementioned researchers give in-depth focus on the analysis of how pragmatic failures affect the acts of intercultural communication, but instead give their main focus to the causes of pragmatic failures. All in all, the three past studies are used as references and guidance to bridge the gap in the current study. Moving forward, the methodology of the study. First and foremost, research design and approach. In the study, the researcher adopted qualitative content analysis in analyzing the data of the study. Given that the data of this research is in a form of interaction between characters of different cultural backgrounds in the movie, qualitative content analysis is the best suited method as the researcher can measure and examine the frequency, importance, and relationship of specific words, themes, and concepts in the movie. In addition, the data collected were coded using Thomas' 1983 model of cross-cultural pragmatic failure, which divides pragmatic failures into socio-pragmatic failure and pragma-linguistic failure, with the analysis involving verbal communication, body language, and cultural awareness among the characters. As for the sample, the researcher decided to look at and analyze all interaction between people from British, Indian, and native British in the selected movie Benny Like Beckham, due to the reason that their interaction best capture instances of pragmatic failures in real-life intercultural communication setting. As for the sampling technique, the method of purposive sampling was used. The reason for the choices are that this film contains many crucial to investigate the examples, elements, and situations of pragmatic failures that occur in the film and see how this relates to real-life pragmatic failure situation and understand why pragmatic failures occur. As for the research instruments and materials, coding guidelines and coding scheme for the particular study were prepared. Following that, human coder is chosen as the method to codate the data collected from the movie examined. To give a further idea, the table below showcases the coding guidelines which are used to codate the data collected from the movie. This includes using color codes for each type of pragmatic failures in order to assist me in identifying and analyzing the data in the final year project. Moving on, the data collection procedure. There were a few steps taken by the researcher to collect the necessary data. The researcher first chose the study's primary focus, which is the analysis of a film that centers on an interaction involving intercultural communication. In the process of achieving this, the researcher conducted a library research on pragmatic failures in intercultural communication. From this action, the researcher comes to a decision to select Thomas' 1983 model of cross-cultural pragmatic failure as the most appropriate theoretical framework for the study. Following that, the researcher began to prepare the coding guidelines and the coding schemes to ease the process of collecting the data needed. After that, the researcher chose the specific film that will be used to gather the data because the movie Benny Like Beckham is regarded as one of the best movies that is very similar in portraying a real-life interaction between individuals of British and the British Indian cultures. The researcher chose the movie as the data for the research. Lastly, the researcher reviewed the movie and decided to select all scenes that feature interaction between characters from the British and the British Indian culture as the guide for the final project. As for the data analysis procedure, first and foremost, the researcher extracts the pragmatic failure instances by watching and analyzing the verbal and non-verbal intercultural communication in the movie. Second of all, the researcher analyzed the data according to the study's research question and the study's research objective. Thirdly, from the data collected, the researcher differentiated pragmatic failures from normal disagreements. Fourthly, the researcher arranged the results into tables showing the types of pragmatic failures and the effects of the identified pragmatic failures in intercultural communication. And lastly, the researcher used the result to draw conclusion and generalization based on the two types of pragmatic failures. Moving on, the result of the study. First and foremost, research question 1, which is what are the types of pragmatic failures instances in intercultural communication in the movie Benny Like Beckham. The 6 types of pragmatic failures were divided according to the 2 categories of pragmatic failures proposed by Thomas 1983, which is pragma-linguistic failure and socio-pragmatic failure. The 3 types of pragma-linguistic failure include inappropriate transfer of expression, inappropriate transfer of speech acts, and failure to express or interpret others' meanings. On the contrary, the 3 types of socio-pragmatic failures include failures in understanding others' intentions, failure in understanding others' states, and failure in understanding a situation. According to the table shown, it was observed that out of the 25 samples of dialogue, there were 35 units of pragmatic failures detected, with all 6 types of pragmatic failures were found in the movie. From the table below, it can also be seen that SF1, failures in understanding others' intention, recorded the highest number of frequency with 9 units, followed by SF3, failures in understanding a situation with 8 units, and SF2, failure in understanding others' states with 6 units. Moving on, PF3, which is failures to express or interpret others' meaning, PF1, inappropriate transfer of expression, and PF2, inappropriate transfer of speech acts, recorded the 4th highest frequency, with all 3 of them recorded the frequency of 4 units. All in all, it is concluded that the movie examined consists more of socio-pragmatic failures as opposed to pragma-linguistic failure, with a ratio of 23 to 12. This is mainly due to the fact that the characters of British Indians are also fluent in speaking the English language, thus resulting in fewer occurrences of pragma-linguistic failures. Moving on, the result of research question 2, which is how do the identified pragmatic failures affect intercultural communication between the characters in the movie Ben Eli Beckham. From table 4.3, it is observed that out of the 25 samples, which consists of 35 units of pragmatic failures, the outcomes of the pragmatic failures in intercultural communication are split into 2, which are positive and negative effects. Further analysis showed that there are a total of 10 pragmatic failures that lead to positive effects, while there are a total of 25 pragmatic failures that lead to negative effects. From table below, it can also be observed that out of 4 PF1 instances, all 4 were shown to affect the act of intercultural communication negatively. In contrast, as for PF2 and PF3, out of 4 instances for each type of pragmatic failure, 1 of the instances affects the intercultural communication positively, while the other 3 brings negative effect. Following that, SF1 recorded the highest ratio of positive effect of pragmatic failures, where out of 9 instances, 4 of them showcased positive effects, while 5 of the instances showcased negative effect. As for SF2, it is recorded a ratio of 2 to 4 instances of positive to negative effects. Lastly, SF3 recorded the highest number of negative effects, which is 6 units of negative, while having 2 units that lead to positive effects. All in all, it is understood that both categories of pragmatic failures show a higher tendency to have negative effects in intercultural communication, with the difference being that socio-pragmatic failure presents higher chances of resulting in positive effects as opposed to pragma-linguistic failure. The discussion and conclusion of the study. First and foremost, discussion on research question 1. It was revealed from the collected data that all 6 types of pragmatic failures were involved throughout the movie. Further analysis revealed that there were 4 units of SF1, 4 units of SF2, and 4 units of SF3. Following that, there were 9 units of SF1, 6 units of SF2, and 8 units of SF3. Pertaining to that, I will provide explanation on one of the instances from PF1, which is the inappropriate transfer of expression. PF1 in this study was analyzed at lexical, phrasal, and sentential levels as implied in the table below. From the analysis, it was revealed that the dialogue extracted contains the pragma-linguistic failure of inappropriate transfer of expression as opposed to others, because the phrase "no, we didn't" is a form of expression that is being used by a speaker to imply that the speaker does not have an idea about a certain topic or piece of information in particular, as quoted by Cambridge Dictionary in 2021. In the scene, the character Coach Joe apologized to Jaz's parents as he just found out that Jaz's parents do not know, nor do they give consent for Jaz to train and play football for a team that he coaches. After Coach Joe has apologized politely, Mrs. Bahamra decided to respond with a stern voice saying, "No, we didn't," which shocks Coach Joe and causes a breakdown in communication, forcing Coach Joe to apologize once more to them. This is classified as an inappropriate transfer of expression because Mrs. Bahamra's response to Coach Joe's dialogue makes her appear rude and impolite, which may give Coach Joe the impression that the British Indian household does not know how to be polite to their guests. These occurrences of pragmatic failures is also influenced by their cultural background. as despite both the British and Indian cultures being classified as cultures that practice more indirect communication by the Hofstede cultural dimension, from the India perspective, however, it is normal and not considered rude to practice direct communication with others who are younger than them, as quoted by Jung Hare in 2015. As mentioned, to avoid the occurrence of pragmatic failure in the form of inappropriate transfer of expression, on Mrs. Brahmra's side, it is more appropriate for her to use the expression, yes, we just know about it, instead of no, we didn't, so that she will appear to be more polite to her guests, thus preventing the pragmalinguistic failure from occurring. Thus, I have provided the similar way of justification of categorizing all pragmatic failures instances detected into each types of pragmatic failures in the final year project. Moving on, the discussion on research question 2. As depicted in the table below, it is observed that out of 35 pragmatic failures that occurred in the movie examined, there were a total of 10 positive outcomes and 25 negative outcomes. To further explain, I will present one example of pragmatic failure that affects the intercultural communication positively, and to really explain the way I rationalize and justify the categorization of the effects of each pragmatic failure instances appear in the movie examined into negative and positive effects. From the example depicted in the table below, one can see an example of pragmalinguistic failure that affects the act of intercultural communication positively under the type of PF3, which is failure to express or interpret others' meaning. In the scene, Coach Joe is the one who fails to understand the meaning behind Mr. Brahmra's verbal utterances. Despite this communication breakdown, the outcomes that come from the situation are positive. Because Coach Joe is unable to understand and interpret Mrs. Brahmra's verbal utterance, it prompts Coach Joe to further explain the information in terms of the big game the next day on Jess's footballing opportunity, which also prompts Mr. Brahmra to remember the information. On the following day, which is the day of Jess's sister's wedding ceremony as well as the day of the final football match of Jess's football team, Mrs. Brahma lets Jess to take a few times off her sister's wedding ceremonies to come to the final match. Following this, Jess was able to play in the final match for a total of 40 minutes, and Jess was also able to be with her sister and her entire family for the most part of the wedding ceremonies. On top of that, Jess was performing extremely well on her 40-minute spell in the field, which resulted in the American squad rating her highly and thus deciding to offer her a full scholarship to train at an American professional football club in America. All in all, this example clearly depicted the positive effects that come from pragmatic failures of pragmalinguistic failure. To further explain, in the final year project, I have also thoroughly justified the rationale behind why each of the pragmatic failures instances appeared in the movie examined were categorized to bring negative effects and positive effects to the act of intercultural communication in the similar way of me rationalizing and justification that I have just presented. Moving on, the conclusion for the study. This study is in the identification of the pragmatic failure instances and analyzing how the identified pragmatic failures affect intercultural communication between the characters in the movie Ben Eli Beckham. Moreover, the implication of the findings and discussion are beneficial towards different groups of people, including individuals of British and British Indian, academic researchers that have an interest in explaining and exploring the fields of pragmatics, as well as every individual that lives in a diverse community. To reiterate, the study aspires to bridge the cross-cultural gaps by assisting individuals from diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds to realize the importance in having a better understanding of others' cultural backgrounds, as this is important to create harmony and uniting a community. Last but not least, the recommendation for future study. There are a number of improvements to be considered for future research in conducting pragmatic studies under pragmatic failure analysis. Firstly, future researchers can consider analyzing other forms of work aside from movies, such as podcasts, interviews, novels, advertisements, manuscripts, poetry, dramas, and magazines. Secondly, analyzing a bigger sample of data is recommended for future research to obtain more accurate results and possibly be capable of identifying more instances of each type of pragmatic failure. Thirdly, it is encouraged for future research to include other models of pragmatic failure, such as George Yule's 1996 key concepts on pragmatic failures and Brown and Levinson 1987 politeness strategies and contemplate them with the pragmatic failure model proposed that I have used for this study. Lastly, the researchers strongly suggest that future research on pragmatic failures analysis include an examination of pragmatic words from a wider range of languages and cultures and not only limited only to the English language and culture. Following that, it marks the end of my final year project presentation. Thank you for paying attention and Assalamualaikum.